If you didn't know,
I'm black.
it's no secret, not really a big secret, that America has a history deep rooted in racism. From the practice of having slaves to the horrible lynching of Emmett Till. And though these events are mainly common knowledge among everyone, there are still a lot of atrocities that a lot of people don't really know about. In Tuskegee, Alabama, a horrible experiment was conducted on 600 black men from 1932 to 1972 called the Tuskegee Study of Syphilis in the Negro Male. The study was created by the U.S. Public Health Service, or USPHS, with the help of the Tuskegee Institute. It was made to record the progression of syphilis in black men, and after they recorded the progression, they also conducted autopsy to see the results. They specifically chose McCown County in Alabama because one, it had a very high black population. Two, 35% of that population had syphilis. And three, the majority of the people living there were poor and illiterate because they didn't really have any public education at the time, because it was 1932, and there wasn't really any institutions to help black folks. And because the fact that they were poor and illiterate, this made it much more easier for the researchers to trick and manipulate these people. Of the 600 men that were experimented on, 399 of them had syphilis, while 201 didn't. The 201 men were supposed to be the control group within the experiment, and the people in the experiment didn't even know that they were being experimented on. They weren't giving any form of informed consent, so that meant that one, they didn't know that they were in an experiment, and two, they didn't even know that they had syphilis. The men were originally told that they were being treated for bad blood, which was a common phrase at the time. Bad blood could basically be things like anemia, syphilis, or just fatigue, so it was a very vague term. Even though they were told that they were being treated for bad blood, they weren't being treated at all. The point of the experiment was to just watch syphilis progress in these men. Like I said, these men weren't given any form of treatment, which is really messed up because penicillin was readily available at that time, and penicillin is actually a very effective way of treating syphilis. Quote, the Henderson Act was passed in 1943, requiring tests and treatment for venereal diseases to be publicly funded, and by 1947, penicillin had become the standard treatment for syphilis, prompting the USPHS to open several rapid treatment centers specifically to treat syphilis with penicillin. All the while, they were actively preventing 399 men from receiving the same treatments. End quote. And like I said, this experiment started in 1932 and went all the way up to 1972. So 40 years and no form of treatment was given, even though penicillin was available in 1943. Well, it was created in 1943, but readily available in 1947. So the real reason why that the experiment was even created was because of two words: racist ideologies. Racist ideologies were highly prevalent in the medical field at that time, being highly influenced by things like racist pathology and eugenics, which, if you didn't know, was a common practice used by the Nazis. Quote, major medical journals argued that blacks were inclined to have certain defects, especially sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis, because of their prodigal behavior and lack of hygiene. This kind of racial ideas were shared by the PHS officials who were in charge of the Tuskegee study. This would eventually lead the USPHS to come up with the theory that white people experience more neurological damage from syphilis, while black people experience more cardiovascular damage. And because of this theory, that created the birth of this whole experiment. Some of you are probably wondering what exactly the men had to deal with while being untreated. And I could just read off the list of the symptoms of syphilis, but it won't be as impactful. So I'm just gonna show this video, which is ironically made by the USPHS.
One of the most common late skin lesions is the nodulo-ulcerative syphilis. This lesion consists of nodules which progress to ulceration. They often arrange themselves in circles or arcs. Such lesions result in scars characterized by the fact that they do not contract. The serpiginous syphilis is characterized by its snake-like border with slight atrophy and scaling within the arcs. Osteochondritis of the nasal structures may result only in perforation of the septum and collapse of the bridge of the nose, producing the well-known saddle nose. This is more frequent in congenital than in acquired syphilis. Perforation of the palate is not frequent but should be looked for. Most cases of osseous syphilis come to treatment before the condition is this far advanced. General paresis, however, is a psychiatric diagnosis. The signs include change in personality, neurasthenic symptoms such as depression or elation, lack of judgment, confusion of ideas, impaired memory, and slurred speech.
Tell me, how is your memory?
Memory 100%.
Memory's 100%. How are your spirits?
Spirits 100%.
Are you happy?
And night work. Happy New Year. God bless you, America.
You're happy.
You know, nighttime work.
I wonder if you'd say this after me. Lovely Lily Lehman. Lovely Lily Lehman.
100%.
Truly rural.
Truly true viewpoint, America.
Truly rural.
Truly rural.
Liquid electricity.
Liquid electricity.
Like I said, I already know it's ironic for me to use a video created by the USPHS when they're the one who conducted the whole experiment, but this also shows how the service knew the effects of syphilis and all these horrible symptoms, yet they still proceeded with this experiment. When I was researching about this whole experiment, it was stated that there was some sort of exchange, or the men received an exchange for being in the study, making it seem like they had some sort of benefit. Quote, in exchange for taking part in the study, the men received free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance. Now, let me tell you how this wasn't a real exchange. The only reason why they gave these free things was because, one, the free medical exams just provided a record of the health of these subjects throughout the experiment, so it's not really a benefit at all. Two, the free food was deliberate because, like I mentioned before, these people lived in poverty, so them enticing them with free food obviously would make them keep coming back. But like I said, they didn't know they were being experimented on. They thought they were being treated for bad blood. Dr. Wagner, who was the director of the USPHS at the time, even stated, quote, if the colored population become aware that accepting free hospital care means a post-mortem, every darky will leave Macon County and it will hurt Dibbles Hospital, end quote. Another reason why this wasn't even beneficial at all was that the men never even had the option to quit the unconsensual experiment. Like, the researcher even went out of their ways to go to every doctor in the town and basically tell them to deny any treatment to these people. There was even a story where 250 of these men were drafted to the military. And when you're going to the military, you obviously have to be treated for any form of disease. So the researchers basically did was exempt all the men, preventing them to receive penicillin for the syphilis in order to continue with their studies. So yeah, not really an exchange. The experiment was finally over in 1972 because Gene Heller of Associated Press exposed the experiment to the public. So now everybody knew what was going on for 40 years. Even though the experiment was now over, only 74 individuals were actually alive by the end of it. 128 of them died due to syphilis or because of its complications from the symptoms. Also, 40 wives were infected with syphilis because syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease. So they got the disease from their husband. And as well, syphilis is also transferable, so it can be inherited. And that's what ended up happening, having 19 children being diagnosed with congenital syphilis. After the whole situation, there was a class action lawsuit for $9 to $10 million, and the victims did win. But even though the victims won the case and got their money, justice was still not served because none of the researchers who were in the whole experiment were even arrested for their crimes. If you're thinking this was just a one-time thing and the US would never do anything like this and like this was just a bad mistake in history, well, you're wrong. This is not going to be the first time the United States is involved in something crazy like this. There was another situation similar to this in Guatemala, but the main difference between the Tuskegee situation and the Guatemalan one is that in Guatemala they were purposely infected with gonorrhea, syphilis, and chancroid. So yeah, it only gets worse.